Hello and welcome back to SilverGryphon Makes a Thing. It's spooky season and I have something special for you this time. I've teamed up with some amazing doll artists here on YouTube for a Halloween collaboration. When you finish this video, go check out their creepy and creative customs. This year we have BlurredColors Art, BumbleCrafty, Dollee Mixtures, Heliophobiant dolls, InsaneLeeCreating, Lucía's Strange Universe, Shelby KG, yours truly, and Stitchwyck Creations. It's a really great group serving up some delightful Halloween dolls, so make sure to give them all some love. As for me, well, I'm back on my nonsense with more Monster Hunter High. In honor of Halloween, we're doing another one of Monster Hunter's creepiest creatures, the Elder Dragon, Vaal Hazak. Vaal Hazak was made for Halloween. Appearing in Monster Hunter World's Rotten Vaal map, it's a reclusive elder dragon that cloaks itself in the decaying corpses of other monsters and cultivates an energy-draining bacteria known as effluvium in order to sap energy and nutrients from its prey. It features a body covered in long, hooked spines and a really cool double jaw straight out of a deep-sea fish. It's absolutely perfect for Halloween. Let's not waste any time on this one. Let's armor up, eat a few knollberries to keep that effluvium at bay, and get started. I spent a few days sketching out concept art and studying reference images. After numerous iterations, I came up with this. I was going with a sort of Angel of Death vibe with a long hooded robe inspired by the Muppet version of the Ghost of Christmas Past. My design also included the corset off of Vaal Hazak's female armor set and a spiky crown. Back when I was working on my mini-me, I had a little accident while wiping off the factory paint. Rainbow High dolls have inset acrylic eyes, and acrylic and acetone, well, let's just say they're not exactly friends. I was left with half-melted, cloudy eyes that were quite ruined for my mini-me. So I scrapped using that particular doll and went with a different one for that project instead. But a lot of art accidents can become the genesis for other projects. I held on to that doll and the ruined eyes and later realized that they'd be perfect for this project. As a bonus, she's already prepped. We can skip the haircut and the face cleaning and go right to the cosmetic surgery. Vaal Hazak has two sets of lower jaws, a large, double-hinged lower jaw and a set of pharyngeal jaws inside the throat, much like a moray eel. Or a xenomorph, if you are not me and actually like watching horror films. The double jaws are one of Vaal Hazak's major features, so we can't just skip over them. I use an X-acto knife to cut away the lower portion of her face. I've noticed that Rainbow High doll heads are way harder than Monster High heads, so it's important to use a sharp, new blade and a lot of caution. Don't be afraid to heat up the head with a hairdryer or something if you do something like this. It'll help soften the plastic and make it a lot easier to carve. I reinsert the eyes and hot glue them into place. The jaw, wings, and tail all need to be properly anchored, so I get out my hand drill and I drill some holes into the face and the back to support these parts. I'm feeling very ambitious with this project, and I really want to make a properly hinged jaw, so my plan was to build up Apoxie Sculpt around an armature of wire, eye pins, and the world's tiniest nuts and bolts. I think it took me an hour to get the first half of the armature into place. For anyone wondering, I used eye pins instead of wire since the eye pins are made of a much stiffer metal than my jewelry wire. To bulk up the jaw just a little and to help secure this rather precarious frame, I apply hot glue along the first segment and the joints. Then I repeat the process for the other half of the jaw. And now, a montage of me dropping things while trying to build the armature. Now it's time to start tackling the wings. I want them to be at least partially posable, so I'm experimenting. I found these doodads on Amazon that are made up of a little cup on a prong piece and a piece that looks kind of like one of those old-fashioned strongman dumbbells. Pop them together and they make excellent little ball and socket joints, which is exactly what I want for the shoulder joints of Vaal Hazak's wing. For the long bones of the upper and lower wings, you know, I'm not really sure what to call these in a six-limbed creature. All flying vertebrates in our world have 4 limbs, and these would be analogous to our humerus and radius and ulna. Anyway, for these I'm using these little stirring straws for a base. They're very lightweight, but should make a decent base. One socket piece gets glued into one end of the straw, and a wire loop into the other to make a wing humerus. The wing radius gets a wire loop glued into both ends. For the phalanges, I simply bend pieces of wire to form a loop with 2 ends coming off at an acute angle, which get bent to fit the shape I want. I screw the pieces together to make sure my wing skeleton looks how I want it, then disassemble them so I can start sculpting. I never sculpted very much before I started customizing dolls, but now it feels like I can't go a single project without breaking out either the Apoxie Sculpt or the air dry clay. This particular project is demanding a lot of layers. I need to sculpt both sets of lower jaws, the teeth, all the bumps and horns of the head and the skull, the wings. All of that is easier with a firm base to work on. I start by bulking up the wing bones, laying in the base for the back of the mouth so it isn't just like an empty cavity, the upper and pharyngeal jaws, and then the bridge of the nose to make the start of a muzzle. In the next pass, I come back in and build up the wing muscles, lower jaw, muzzle, and the ridges around the jaw. I also sculpt some nice pointy teeths. Like many deep-sea fish, Vaal Hazak has long fangs in the front of its mouth only. And then it's another pass for laying in the gums and inserting the teeth, adding the horns, and finishing the facial details. One big challenge with these Monster Hunter High dolls is the head shape. A lot of the monsters I'm working from have fairly pronounced muzzles, and it's always interesting trying to translate that to a flat, humanoid facial shape while still maintaining the essence of the monster's head. It takes a lot of studying the monster's features and picking out the most important ones to retain while compressing others. In Vaal Hazak's case, the really key features to keep were the long fangs, the free-floating, double-hinged lower jaw, the pharyngeal jaws, and this sort of double eye socket thing. I've seen a few people speculate that these orange spots aren't actually eyes. They say that these little red spots that you can just barely see in most of the stills are the monster's real eyes, and that these big orange spots are just some sort of sensory organ. I thought that was kind of interesting, and it would let me make use of the doll's original facial structure pretty well, so I decided to go with it. While I'm thinking about it, I slapped some epoxy on her shoes as well. Vaal Hazak has these weird claws that sort of hook outward, which I thought was an interesting detail to bring over. Phew, now we got all of that sculpting out of the way, it's time to paint. I painted the whole body in a dark, dusky purple as a base. I do my best to pre-color the joints with black Sharpie in the hopes that it will hide any chipping of the color. Results were mixed. After that's dry, I come back in with a teal tinted gray color and paint in scales. Nice big scales on the belly and down the arms and legs, and simple dots for scales along the rest of the body. And then I make the mouth nice and red with some lovely white teeth. Afterwards, I come in with a pale beige color and add highlights to the head sculpt and the scales. The eyes and sensory organs got painted in red and orange with my favorite interference pigments over the top. To make the sculpting pop, I come back in with a watered down dark paint and lay it in the creases and the recesses. The shoes get painted as well. At this point, I looked at my work and went, not a whole lot of red anywhere but the face. I ought to bring it down in the design somehow. I was absolutely focused on what was in front of me and not thinking about the outfit, a pattern that will repeat as you'll see shortly. And so my next thought was, well, let's paint the soles the same red as the mouth. And now, for one of the best puns of my career. Folks, may I present to you Ghoulie Batons. If you just heard a thump somewhere in the distance, that's probably my roommate groaning over that pun. While my roommate regrets permitting me to move in with her, I seal doll and shoes alike with a couple of coats of diluted Liquitex matte varnish. The eyes, sensory organs, claws, and teeth all get a coat of Liquitex gloss varnish to make them shine. The tail is a little more complex than my last couple attempts at tails, which were basically just tubes. I really wanted to include the hooked spikes, so I found some stiff black felt, cut out 2 strips of spikes, and sewed them into place. The bottom row of spikes was easy, just sandwich the felt in between the 2 inside-out pieces of fabric and stitch away. The top row was a little trickier since the tail has this really tall section right after the rump before narrowing down sharply. Rather than ruined my stiffened felt by warping it to try and fit inside out in between the tail pieces, I decided to sew the top seam right side out with a ladder stitch. That actually turned out pretty well, and from there it was simple enough to add a wire armature and stuff the whole thing with fluff left over from making yarn wefts before sewing up the top and gluing it into place. Next, the wings. With the wings assembled, I sketched myself a pattern and cut out pieces of this gray fabric I had left over from another project for the wing membranes. I think it's actually technically a moleskin. I don't know. I got it at the scrap bin at the fabric store. The hot glue gun makes a return when I use it to glue the wing membranes onto the phalanges. Alright, that's the wing membranes. The other really notable feature of Vaal Hazak is its cloak of rotting flesh. I could hardly leave that out. I cut more roughly wing-shaped pieces of fabric, shredded up the edges, added a few slashes here and there, and glued them on over the wings. This also had the benefit of nicely concealing the join between the wing membranes and the wing itself. I assembled what I had and realized my concept art, if executed as intended, meant I was going to be wasting a lot of time and effort. You see, I really like sculpting and painting my dolls, and I put a lot of effort into painting those scales all over her body. If I went with the full robe like I had originally planned, I would be covering up all of that work, and I had forgotten to account for how I was going to make those clouds of effluvium bacteria. Well, alright then, time to pivot. The full robe is out, and so is the corset. Perhaps some kind of toga instead? I cut out a long strip of my red fabric and spent a couple of hours just fiddling with wrapping and draping it around the doll, trying to come up with an arrangement that would include something like a hood, but would also show more of the body. After a lot of work and a few judicious stitches and dabs of Fabri-Tac glue, I came up with this. I actually like how there's just this loop of fabric over the head rather than an actual hood, because it really lets you see that free-floating jaw. Since I basically attached this outfit to the doll, I have to weather it in place to make it more like rotten meat. I just carefully go in with a couple of passes of acrylic paint washes in various rotten meat colors until it's good and grody. Fortunately, the washes are thin enough that I can basically wipe off anything that transfers onto the body by mistake. And last is the effluvium. In the game, it's rendered as these swirling gray clouds around the monster, so I decided the best way to portray it was with gray fluff. I grabbed some gray acrylic yarn from the stash and brush it out like I was going to make wefts with it, but I don't straighten it. Then I just glue patches onto strategic locations, with a fair bit of fiddling since I'm absolutely winging things at this point. And Vaal Hazak is done. She's definitely super creepy. I've actually really enjoyed working on these more horror-themed dolls, even though they're like way outside of my usual ballpark. There's just something really satisfying about the reactions they tend to get, and they make it for a really interesting challenge. Vaal Hazak is going to go right up on my shelves with Kezu, where they can terrorize hunters to their heart's content. That was a lot of fun. For more creepy Halloween doll content, check out my collaboration partners. They've created a delightfully spooky lineup of dolls for your enjoyment. Once again, we have BlurredColors Art, BumbleCrafty, Dollee, Dollee Mixtures, Heliophobiant Dolls, InsaneLeeCreating, Lucía's Strange Universe, Shelby KG, myself, and Stitchwyck Creations. Well, that's it for Halloween for me. If you enjoyed Vaal Hazak, please remember to like and subscribe so you never miss a video. Thanks so much for watching, and join me next time on SilverGryphon Makes a Thing, where we make whatever we feel like at the moment.